Yeah. I love my HBCU. And boy, I love it, love it. I love it, love it. I love my HBCU. And man, I hope my team they won one. Yeah. I hope my team they won one. Yeah. Man. I hope my team they won one. I hope my team they won one. Yeah. I tune into the HBCU Sports Lab to see if my team won or lost. If they lost, I'm quiet as a mouse. But if they won, keep tab. I'ma do the dab, yeah. Dr. Cavil, he know what he be talking about. Mike and Charles, they know what they be talking about. They compress the analytic data with the hip hop. If you know them like I know them, they gon' tell you if your team, if they won or lost, and who the ball. So listen to Professor, yes sir, and pay attention, cause he gon' teach a lesson.
All right. Well, good afternoon, good evening. Hopefully none of you are in good morning status. Welcome to Dr. Cavil inside the HBCU Sports Lab with Charles Bishop, Mike Washington. We have none other than the great A.D. Drew, who is serving as both engineer, composer, background, all of that, and he may even chime in for a few comments. We have a special guest today. Today's show will focus a little bit on African Americans in the lacrosse. Yes, I didn't say football. I didn't say basketball. I didn't say track and field. I said African Americans in lacrosse. But first, let me get out of the way of our normal introduction. This is episode 514 of Inside the HBCU Sports Lab radio show and podcast covering the HBCU diaspora. And when I say diaspora, I say that with a capital D. All things HBCU sports are pertaining to African American athletes, large and small institutions from NAIA to NCAA. We share insights and information on the HBCU sports culture and the HBCU athletic aesthetics to facilitate the story of HBCU's athletic programs and the business of HBCU sports. I'm your host, not Dr. Cavil, not Charles Bishop. Love you both, but today is Big Mike. We are filming from our home studios, and when I say home studios, I do mean home studios, from our KCOA 1230 AM studios with the Texas Radio Hall of Famer, none other than Ralph Cooper, in the beautiful home of Texas Southern University. So now that we've gotten a little bit of that out of the way, tell you a little bit about today's show. We're going to focus a lot on the sport of lacrosse, how it pertains to African Americans, HBCU institutions, and some prominent players. And we have a special guest. We found him on the street laying around. He had a box of Frenchie's chicken. So we said, well, why don't you join the show today? So we're going to talk a little bit about lacrosse, but before we get to that, we're going to talk some high-level sports. There's some big news that I think many of you probably are aware of, but maybe we'll cover it. First and foremost, congratulations, Michael Strahan, Rod Broadway. They will represent HBCUs on the College Hall of Fame ballot. This was as of, I guess, yesterday. It came across all kinds of media channels. I got to credit HBCU Sports, HBCU Game Day. I also got to credit the channel formerly known as Twitter. But there's a notable list of who's who in Black college football who earned some national recognition Monday afternoon as the College Hall of Fame announced its list of candidates for the class of 25. At the top of the list is former Texas Southern University. So if you're from Prairie View University, you just say Texas Southern, the other Texas school. Anyway, defensive end Michael Strahan, who went on to win 2 Super Bowls as a member of the New York Giants and is now a nationally known TV host on the show Good Morning America on ABC. And he's also a major co-host on NFL on Fox. He is joined by 2-time Super Bowl winner, Fort Valley State alum Tyrone Poole. I'll say that again because my father-in-law is a graduate and professor at Fort Valley State. Alumni Tyrone Poole, who won back-to-back championships with the New England Patriots in 2003 and 2004. Mississippi Valley State is also heavily represented as former NFL cornerback Ashley Ambrose, NFL linebacker and current North Carolina A&T head coach Vincent Brown, and one-time Tampa Bay Buccaneers quarterback Parnell Dickinson are on the list of candidates. Not to be overlooked, Maryland Eastern Shore defensive end Carl Harrison, who played in Super Bowl IV. Yes, Super Bowl IV for the Philadelphia Eagles, and Winston-Salem State and Dallas Cowboys running back Timmy Newsome. Them Cowboys round out the list of those nominated as part of the College Football Hall of Fame's division segment, highlighting players at the FCS Division II and Division III levels. So there are some legendary folks as announced. So I just paused there for thought. What are your thoughts, AD? Any thoughts? We'll get to our guest. What are your thoughts on that?
A great list of names that you just went over. Some of them ring a natural bell. Some of them you have to do some research to find out who they were, what they did, and everything. I have met Tyrone Poole a couple of times, been in the same room with him. He is one of the voices of SIAC football during football season. So I have been around when he's done a couple of broadcasts there for the ESPN family of networks. So he and I have had some great conversations offline there. So, and Michael Strahan, I guess the question is, what took so long for Michael Strahan? Not only did he have a stellar collegiate career, but we all know what he did in the NFL and what he has done post NFL. He's probably had a more successful career since leaving the New York Giants than he had with the New York Giants. And then we're not even going to talk about the clothing line and just him as a business person and an entrepreneur. So, just anytime somebody gets elected to the Hall of Fame, it's not the Hall of Good. So you know that they have to have some type of accolades, numbers, or some type of significant contribution to whatever game that they are being elected to. So congratulations to all of them. And just a point of special privilege, it is great to see you, Mike, to have one of the people whose name is actually in the logo and on the jingle back with us once again, make a special guest appearance.
Oh, I appreciate it. Glad to be here. So, sometimes schedule calls, but it is certainly glad to be in the house of the HBCU Sports Lab. So I wanted to cover that fact. And then I want to, talk to our guests, and I'll let our esteemed guests, and again, I'll rewind our listener that this show will focus on the sport of lacrosse, how it pertains to African Americans, and some prominent players. So I don't know of no other expert than this guy we found sleeping under a bridge with a box of Frenchies under his arm, and he turned out to be a pretty good lacrosse player. So Bryce, why don't you introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about yourself and how you and your journey into lacrosse.
All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Bryce Washington. My dad is, the guy who likes to talk a lot of mess about me. But I just finished my 4th year playing collegiate lacrosse. My 2nd year at the Division II level, I played at Barton College for the Bulldogs. We won a conference championship in 2023. I play midfield and attack, which is offense for anyone who is not very well versed in the sport. To kind of begin, I would say my dad wasn't too happy about this story, but I was a big baseball player for about somewhere around 12, 14 years. While my dad was in Germany, I gave him a call one day. I said, hey, you know what? I want to start playing lacrosse. I didn't get the greatest reaction, as you could tell, spent all that money going to tournaments in Utah, Florida, all of the above. But that's kind of how my journey started. After that, I stopped playing baseball after, I would say, a couple games, and my lacrosse career kind of took off from there. I started kind of with a new sport, so I wasn't the greatest. I was starting from ground zero. Just, it was a very unknown territory for me. After that, made my way through high school, ended up getting recruited to play at the University of Michigan Dearborn, where I spent 2 years. After that, transferred to play Division II ball. So here we are today.
All right. Well, I appreciate it. Thank you, Bryce. And for our listeners, a lot of them may or may not be familiar with the sport of lacrosse. Can you tell us a little bit about the history? Because when you told me, I was like, lacrosse? What? Huh? So tell us about.
Was it that Valley sound that you make, Mike?
Yeah, Valley
lacrosse.
I was like, lacrosse. All this money we put in baseball, and you want to play lacrosse? So tell us a little bit about the history and your knowledge of the transition of lacrosse to today and how it started and why it's important.
So I will start with how it started. So this game was created by the Native Americans. How this game started, it was more of like it was tradition for them. They played for the creator. They played for themselves. They played for everyone around them. This was not just a recreational sport, but they used it in different ways to settle different matters among tribes, wars, etc. Eventually, once European settlers came in, they saw the game. They transitioned it into the game it is today. The game today has a lot more rules. It's a lot, I would say, less violent to a degree, but still has that same kind of sense of where it came from, where it has the tradition of being creative, playing for something bigger than yourself and playing with the team. So I would say that's like the first place you would have to look at when you start playing the sport. You have to look at its history.
Absolutely. Appreciate it. And, once we started, we started walking down this recruiting list, and we met, other African-American players. It's only a few. And why do you think there's right now a few, and that number's growing, African-American players in the sport of lacrosse? What are some reasons behind that?
I would say a lot of that would start with exposure. The first place you see lacrosse being played is in richer areas around bigger cities. So that's the first place you're going to see it. And especially you look at the South, for instance. I mean, for one, when I was first looking for a team, it was hard for me to find one. There wasn't a team within a 10-mile radius of where we lived in Texas. So that's one of the first things I would have to say. Two, you have other sports that are still going to overshadow it. You got football, baseball, basketball. Those are sports that everyone's more aware to. They're sports that everyone sees on TV. Whereas you look at lacrosse, you're going to see it a couple months during the summer. You're going to see it a little bit during the spring. Most of it's not even on ESPN. That exposure is already not even there. I would say a third reason is it's expensive sport. It's not funded by most schools, especially in the South. You're paying for most of your gear, arm pads, shoulder pads, gloves, a helmet, all of this stuff. When you look at it at the end of the day, that's about $600 alone. Whereas if you have a school that's not going to pay for it, you're not going to get a lot of kids who are just going to randomly sign up at their high school. Other than that, I would say there's not really much other reason. Those are just really big factors that are going to draw a lot of, I would say, the Black community away from the sport and limits their exposure at the very helm of it.
Yeah, we ran into recruiting and Edward Moore asked the question, is lacrosse easier to find, I think, than cricket? The answer is yes. But one of the things we, ran into, particularly in the South, is coaches don't want to lose their athletes. So one of the challenges is they played baseball. Their coach basically shunned us after these two left baseball, shunned both Bryce and my younger son, Justin. They get very sour about losing athletes. So there's a challenge. When lacrosse can, if you look at Jim Brown, he played lacrosse. It benefited him for football. He was a 4-year letterman, leading scorer all year, all kind of scores for Syracuse. And I see Chuck Hunt is commenting as well. This is a sport that can comment, and that knowledge is not out there. So you have a lot of coaches in the South, Southeast that don't want to lose athletes. So they'll allow them to run track to help them for basketball, to help them for football. But when it comes to lacrosse, there's this big shield. There's this wall up that won't allow them to allow their athletes to play lacrosse. And that's why lacrosse, unlike in the Northeast, is not a club sport. And the South, or it's not a UIL sport. And in the South, it's a club sport. So you have to pay for all of your equipment. So that shuns off a lot of people. So, I wish, a lot more of our HBCUs would look into lacrosse as a possible sport. And yes, Edward Moore Prairie View has one of the largest cricket complexes in the U.S. as well. They also have a rugby football team as well that plays on that field. So we'll get into the history, a little bit of the history and HBCUs that played lacrosse in just a minute. Go ahead, AD.
I was going to say, speaking of that complex there in Prairie View, I actually know Mayor Allen, former mayor of Prairie View, Texas, and have talked to him many times about that project. This goes back to my days when I was a Parks and Recreation director, and he did a couple of presentations. I've met Mayor Allen a few times, got his number in my phone, former mayor of Prairie View, and he was just talking about the economic impact of that cricket facility that they have out there, and just different things that we've crossed paths on over the years, talking about youth recreation and the economic impact it can make, especially on smaller towns who don't have a large economic base such as a Prairie View does when you compare it to a lot of our other cities. But I do have a couple of questions for you guys, if y'all don't mind. If you want to do them now, you want to do them after the break, fellas?
All right. I think we're close to the break. We can hit them after the break and come in strong.
All right. You're watching Inside the HBCU Sports Lab with the Washington father and son and AD. We'll be right back after this break.
Since 2002, Empowerment Resources, Inc., a nonprofit organization, has empowered more than 1,500 youth and adults in Duval and surrounding counties through its programs Journey into Womanhood, Girls Mentoring, Life Skills for Teens, and Parenting Education Coaching. To get involved with programs, volunteer, or donate, visit www.empowermentresourcesinc.org. Follow us on social media, facebook.com/empowerment.resources and instagram.com/empowermentJAX.
The human voice has always connected audiences with experiences. Major brands all across America have trusted Kever's voice time and time again. Conversational, powerhouse, intelligent, and sincere. That's the voice you need for your creative marketing process. KEAVERSVOICE.com. Kever's Voice, Kever's Voice, KeversVoice.com. Always on, all the time.
Nope. Nope.
Come on, him?
Ooh, I like him.
Quick, the quicker picker-upper. Bounty picks up messes quicker, and each sheet is 2 times more absorbent, so you can use less.
He's an 8.
He's a 9.
Bounty, the quicker picker-upper.
From novice to aficionado, find yourself here. High quality cigars plus personal customer service. Slow Burn is Waco's only mobile cigar lounge, featuring a meticulous, curated collection of premium cigars. Visit our website, www.slowburnwaco.com. That's www.slowburnwaco.com.
Compress the analytic data with your hip hop. If you know them like I know them, they gon' tell you if your team, if they wanna lose, and who the ball. So listen to Professor, yes sir, and pay attention, cause he gon' teach a lesson.
All right. Welcome back. Thank you folks for joining us. And once again, we're here with my guy, AD Drew, BCSN, and all other shows. And with the guy known as Bryce Washington that you see at the bottom of your screen. We found him under a bridge, asleep with a box of Frenchie's chicken under his arm. He said he played lacrosse, so we decided to invite him on the show. We're talking today about high-level the diaspora of HBCU sports as usual, but we're focusing today on the state of Black lacrosse and sharing basic lacrosse information as it pertains to the African American diaspora players at either HBCUs or other institutions. So we have Bryce Washington with us. He introduced himself earlier, and so and we got into some early discussion about lacrosse. So AD, I think you had a couple of questions that you wanted to put on the table.
Yeah. First of all, I believe Bryce, you said you grew up playing youth baseball.
Yes, sir.
So, what was the transition like for you going from baseball to lacrosse, considering probably most of your friends play either baseball, basketball, or football? How tough was that? Was like, I'm out here playing this sport that most people don't even know what it is.
Yeah, it was a interesting conversation to bring up with my friends. I would say I'd played with most of the kids I played with. I'd been playing since second, third grade, and here I am in eighth grade, about to enter high school, switching sports for something I have very little knowledge of. I'm still times. It was like, what are you doing? Like, but why are you switching? Like, you have such a high future in the sport of baseball, and you're dropping it for, some random sport that half the state's never even heard of. And I remember going to high school, I was still on the team. My coach comes up to me one day. He says, "So I hear you play lacrosse. Like, what's that about?" I told him, like, I was very honest. Like, I was like, this is a sport I like to do. I play a lot of my free time. And whenever I had that conversation to move away from baseball and I was going to go full-time lacrosse, every one of my teammates just stopped talking to me. I never heard from that coach for another couple of years. I don't keep in contact with most of the players I used to play with either. So once I transitioned, that was a very hard time to kind of move away from the sport, just socially. It's just very different aspect.
Yeah. And I'm going to assume that most of your new quote unquote friends that you picked up
Right.
did not look like you and I do, because and maybe I'm ignorant to the fact, but when I associate lacrosse, I associate it more with uppity Caucasian type people, who country club type Caucasians.
You would be correct. It was a very big culture shock when I switched sports. Not that baseball is, at the time, I don't think it was, any crazy amount better. However, I think lacrosse, it was very much widespread. Whereas baseball, I knew I could look at another team. I would say 90% of the time, I would see someone else who looked like me on the field. When I got to lacrosse, I remember the first tournament, we were wondering if we're in the wrong place, because we're driving in the middle of nowhere in Austin, and we're at this ranch that has 12 fields, and I'm the only kid on the lacrosse field who looks like I do. So it was very different start. Even at the college level, it's I would say almost a rarity still that I look at, the other team, my opponents, or even some of my teammates, and someone looks like I do. So I would have to agree. It's a very big culture shock.
Do you kind of get that treatment like when you got a team, an inner city basketball team, when you got the one white kid on the team? We know what he there for. We know he there to shoot. You kind of get that same treatment with lacrosse.
The crazy thing is, I would say 90%.
Y'all act like y'all know what I'm talking about.
Oh yeah,
90% of the time, that's the truth. So there's slides in lacrosse when we're playing defense. Every single time I am on the field, the first thing the coach says is, "Get ready to slide. Get ready to slide. He's fast. He's going to run right by you. Watch the rollback." It's all these different things that the coach is yelling at their defense, as if they already know that it's not going to be good. It's not going to be a good look. And, part of that, I would just say, is just my general skills. However, even whenever I wasn't as good, that was always a thing from the get-go.
Yeah. I remember the true story. We went on a recruiting mission to Penn State. Bryce is the only kid that looks like him on the field. They had a scrimmage. He scored a goal, right? And this is a big deal because if you score a goal, you get the coach's attention. And one of the kids, one of the parents turned around and asked me, "Is that your kid?" I'm the only black dad there on the sideline. He's the only black kid on the field. Can you guess how I really wanted to answer him? So you get those kind of questions.
This is a PG rated show, Mike.
Exactly.
And as you see, Edwin puts up the comment.
Is that your kid? Yes.
It's still the same thing.
He's the only one there, and I get, "Is that your kid?" So how do I answer that question? I politely said yes, but I can't tell you how I really wanted to answer that question. So it's been a unique walk. So needless to say, they've been able to.
What you should have told her was that's the milkman's kid. I'm just taking care of him because he's in my house.
I almost started to tell him, "Well, no, actually, it's not my kid." I was like, yeah. I want to share with you, for some of the folks that made out, some timelines in lacrosse. And I got this from USA Lacrosse. In 1888, Albert F. Lewis is the first known black lacrosse player. He takes the field as a goalie for Cornwall Club and the Canadian national team. His name is found in the Montreal Gazette article from 1888. In 1957, June 10th, Jim Brown scores 5 goals in the first half of the USILA North-South game in Baltimore. Just a few months later, he begins his pro football career with the Cleveland Browns. And then in the most notable date, on March 9th, 1975, Morgan State upsets number 1 ranked Washington and Lee in men's lacrosse. The inspiration for the Tin Bears book chronicling the historic occasion, members of the Bears program rose to fame in the lacrosse world, with Joe Fouch gracing the cover of NCAA Lacrosse Guide in 1978. So some notable moments in lacrosse history. It is a part of our history for those of you who may or may not be aware. So, as we move forward, we look at several HBCUs, and I think you were about to ask a question. I'm sorry, AD. I think I may have glossed over you a second.
No, go on, because we still got half a show for me to get in my questions. And
okay,
the reason I'm asking you guys these questions because a lot of people who are on the chat are probably wondering some of the same things that I am. I just happen to have a microphone to go ahead and say them to y'all.
So we get into this. Bryce is involved, and he and his younger brother, they blossom eventually. They grew fast in lacrosse. Then we come to recruiting, and recruiting is a whole different scale for lacrosse than it is for football or basketball. Particularly now you're a lacrosse player in the South, so they decide they want to play in college. Bryce, share some of the challenges that we had getting recognized by legitimate lacrosse programs.
I would have to say, I'm going to make a comparison first off. I would like to start with baseball. For baseball recruiting, I had already started the recruiting process my freshman year. For baseball, it was, I could stay in Texas. I could stay maybe 1 or 2 states away. And I know I would still get seen by a handful of schools. That was never an issue. We could stay in the South. We wouldn't have to travel too far. The minute I switched to lacrosse, for those of you who don't know, lacrosse is a very northern, northeastern sport, which is where most of the hotbeds are. That's where most of the Division 1, 2, and 3 schools are. So we were having to travel to New York, Maryland, North Carolina, to name a few. But we were having to go up and down the East Coast just to go to different tournaments, also to go to different showcases. That's just where it was. Lacrosse versus football. I would put the same comparison as you recruit in the South for football. That's where it is. Like that's where you want your players to come from. It's the same thing for the lacrosse in the North and Northeast, even the Mid-Atlantic. That's where they want to get their most players from. They want to get them from Maryland, New York, whereas football, it's like Texas, Florida, Georgia, etc. So that was one of the first challenges I had to face, exposure. We were having to travel everywhere. It's not convenient in the very slightest. Coaches don't really want to look at Southern players. They see Southern players as fast, aggressive. However, they don't know if they can handle the true nature of the sport, being as most coaches believe, hey, lacrosse is a northeastern game. That was one of the first challenges that came about us. Second one is, I would say there's a really big skill difference between Southern players and northeastern players. There's a very different style of play there. Southern play is a little bit more faster, more agility-wise, just because most players are coming from football, soccer, track. They're used to the speed, they're used to the aggressiveness, whereas the Northeastern game is a little bit more about finesse. The players are still going to be good. They're still going to be able to run, dodge, do whatever they need to do, but it's going to be a little bit more technical heavy, is where you get those better players from.
Yep. And just for those who not, whenever you hear the term dodge in lacrosse, I had to educate myself. It's synonymous with the term juke in football. When you're dodging, it's basically you're throwing a juke move on someone, but they've perfected and formalized it in lacrosse. And only the best athletes are really good at dodging, as they say. But when I was growing up, it was, can he juke? Can he juke somebody? And for those of you who are on the line, I see some comments. You're familiar with that term. So the terms are synonymous, but they're very different in language. So
so that would be like for us basketball people, that would be like somebody breaking somebody's ankles.
Yes.
Yeah. Just one-on-ones. Really, one-on-ones are the biggest thing. How good are you at beating your guy? That's what it really comes down to. That's what dodging is in a whole one-on-ones.
Yeah. And just like in basketball, like you have a cross move in lacrosse. You have a step back, turnaround move. You have some of the same movements that you have in basketball. They're also useful in lacrosse, and that's why there's such an easy transition for athletes who are good in football and basketball, and I would even say soccer as well. So one of the other challenges was we wanted to look for an African American, at HBCU. Not a lot of choices. You had Hampton, who came on board D1. It was 2016. As of late, Morgan State at one time, then the program went away. Now you have Virginia State, which is Division II, and that's it for HBCUs, with lacrosse. So, and they, like others, typically look for athletes that are from the North or the Northeast. So we tried really hard to get in with Hampton. Unfortunately, if you're not from the Midwest or you're not from the Northeast, it is really hard. It's not that you don't have the skill set. It's not that you don't have the ability. It's a lot of times it's where you're from. Imagine someone from Texas trying to recruit a running back from the state of Maine. Go ahead. I see it coming out, AD.
I got to ask this, since we're talking about the HBCU angle. These two HBCU rosters that you're talking about, you said Virginia State and Hampton, I believe is what you said.
Yes.
Do the rosters reflect the school, or
Yes.
are they like some of our baseball teams, where our baseball teams are the most diverse teams on our particular campuses?
I'll let Bryce.
I'll ask it like that.
Yeah, I'll touch on this
about that.
So I actually played Virginia State in his exhibition scrimmage right before spring started this past season. Both them and Hampton, their roster reflects the school. With Hampton, I know as a fact they have a little bit of diversity, like 3 players, but it's nothing crazy. It's not like I would say.
That's fair.
Like at the end of the day, I personally believe that's just going to happen. It's one of those sports where you're going to have a very inconsistent ratio of who's playing the actual game. While we are moving into Virginia State, though, I would like to, I guess, go ahead and start off with I still believe that a lot of one of the hardest things with recruiting, when we were looking at Hampton, Virginia State, those are both teams who I believe are going to have a long road ahead of them in terms of where they want to be as an actual program. With Hampton, I hate to say it, but they've had kind of a rough past couple seasons. Their only wins have come from playing non-Division I opponents, which has also turned away a couple of players that, maybe would have wanted to go there. But if they're seeing that the only wins are coming from, non-Division I schools, they're going to still go to these other schools where, okay, they're still Division I, they're still solid teams, good enough to, still start. That was one of the crutches that I would say is it makes it really hard to recruit at a school like that.
Yep. So, and Hampton came in as a D1 when probably the better route would have been maybe try starting as D2, then moving up. The reason why is because, if you start, D2, you have it and you have blowout games your first, second, third year, it's not looked upon almost, as bad as it's looked at D1. But, if you look at their margin of losses, the last 3 or 4 years, it's been significant. It's tough to recruit players. Yes, there are newer programs compared to the schools they play against, but it's tough to recruit players when that margin of loss is like that. It's almost like we talk about in football, HBCU, us playing, Prairie View playing Texas A&M or FAMU playing, and we getting routed out. Why do we play these money games? They're playing a lot of non-money games and getting routed. And so it's tough to recruit at a D1 program under those circumstances. When they started out, they had all of the momentum. So, and I think Virginia State had a better leg by starting D2, not as many requirements, and they could recruit a lot of quality players as well. So I know, Bryce, you and I have talked about it, and you had some thoughts on that as well.
I mean, I think Hampton was in a little bit of a different spot than Virginia State was when they first started. Hampton knew they were going to start building a program. They already had guys on the club team ready to go, whereas Virginia State, they said, you know what, we're gonna make the team. We're gonna recruit enough guys to get us by this first season. And after that, we're gonna really take off with recruits. Virginia State has played arguably a better season than Hampton has in the past couple of years, whereas Virginia State, they had a win under the belt this season for a first-year team. I don't consider that a bad thing. Yes, it's Division II lacrosse. Those games are a little bit different in pace. However, Virginia State's outlook's already looking a little bit higher, whereas Hampton's still at the bottom of Division I lacrosse. I hate to say it, they look sometimes like the joke of lacrosse when you are losing consistently 12-plus goal games where the score differentials in the 20s compared to Hampton not making it into the double digits per game, which for a winning team it's not a good look in the long run. That's very far away for them to even say they can make it close to a playoff run. They haven't won a conference game yet. There's still a lot of milestones they would need to hit.
All right. Yeah. I was gonna say, I've got a few more questions I want to throw out after we take our next break there, Mike.
Okay. All right. So let's go into the next break. Some questions. I saw some comments as well. I'll take a look at the comments as well. There was a couple that were interested. I saw something about the DFW. So I'll take a look at that comment as well. Thank you, folks, who are kind of putting in some of the comments, and very interesting comments. So we'll hit those when we come back as well.
If you think all pads are exactly the same, think again. This is Always Ultra Thins reinvented with the Always Triple Protection System. This pad wicks gushes 90% faster, absorbs even more so you can feel dry, and locks odors in. Rethink your pad for up to 100% leak-free and odor-free comfort with the totally reinvented Always Ultra Thins. This is always like never before.
The Cavil Group is a Florida-based marketing and training consulting firm. We help businesses communicate to their target audience and engage them in conversation. We also help to expand their audiences, which will ultimately result in growth for those organizations. In addition to being a certified constant contact specialist, my colleagues and I are also certified in John Maxwell Leadership Principles. We use these proven principles to conduct workshops, training, and private coaching sessions for individuals and companies looking to take things to the next level. Contact us to schedule a free consultation. Issues today, don't delay, call Cavil.
As technology continues to bring changes to the world of education, it's time we also reimagine teacher professional development. Gone are the days of one-size-fits-all learning that can only be accessed at a specific time and place. The Stride PD Center is an on-demand library of mobile-friendly courses that allow educators to learn anytime and anywhere. Our dynamic courses provide bite-sized learning and help educators advance their knowledge while also gaining professional development hours. The best professional development plans are those that include a level of flexibility and choice for educators. Whether you're a teacher, school, or district, visit us today to take charge of your learning.
Compress the analytic data with the hip hop. If you know them like I know them, they gon' tell you if your team, if they want a law, and who the ball. So listen to Professor, yes sir, and pay attention, cause he gon' teach a lesson.
All right, so we are back with the state of Black lacrosse. And we got a lot of good information. We're trying to touch a bunch of points. So, AD, we left off. You had a couple of questions that you wanted to toss out there as well. So go ahead.
And yes, and I'm also, after I ask my question or two, I'm going to get into the some of the comments that I noted that I've got highlighted. I'll get into some of those. But I want to talk to Dad now. I talked to son earlier. So Mike, you know, we know baseball has always had a bit of a economic curve in the African American community because of the investment that it takes with baseball, the travel baseball, the $500 bats, the gloves, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So when it comes to lacrosse, what is the comparison as far as the amount of money? And of course, Bryce played, I'm assuming he played travel baseball also coming up. So considering the cost that you had invested into travel baseball, the travel portion along with the equipment, what are some of the big differences when you're talking about lacrosse?
So some of the big differences are, and let me just say holistically, I would say lacrosse is more. I bought $350, $400 bats for Bryce, for Justin, and those bats don't last forever. You buy expensive cleats. Yeah. But when you look at lacrosse, if you look at some of the equipment that they play with, you know, the sticks themselves, the webs, the gear, it is extremely expensive. Just some of the webs on the stick actually can run, you know, anywhere from $80 to $100. You need at least 2 pairs of those if and they may last a season. And then you're like, you need 2 sticks. Well, a stick's gonna, depending on what kind, anywhere from 120 to 100, but you need 2 of those, and they may last you a year. The other piece is the travel aspect is way more, almost double than it was for baseball. With baseball, we traveled southeast. In lacrosse, we spent summers in the Northeast or in Colorado. We spent so much in airline fees, hotels, just for exposure and just to find good competition. You know, about as in the state of Texas, is about as good as you're going to get with really good lacrosse competition is Dallas-Fort Worth. And I saw a DFW comment in there, but they have a lot of private schools in Dallas. They're pretty good. Austin, you can say it's pretty good. But if you really wanted to get your kids exposure and you wanted to play against the best talent, you have to be in New York, Long Island. You have to be in Pennsylvania. You have to be in Maryland, or the West, Colorado is also that. So that's airlined every year, two kids. So comparatively, lacrosse was way more. I think that's a lot of things one of the things that shuns a lot of African American athletes away. It's not that they can't afford it, but when I go over in football and I have coaches paying for it, or I pay AAU basketball, if they're good enough, I have coaches fronting that cost for them to go to AAU. That's not happening in lacrosse. So the parents have that bill and they have to shoulder that burden for a while. So comparatively, lacrosse is way more.
Right. And also, what were some of the challenges? Because you got high school, then you've got club. What were some of the challenges as far as getting your two sons on club teams? Because I mean, you probably got some of the side-eyed looks when you went to some of the parent meetings and things like that until your two boys were able to prove themselves. What were some of those challenges like, Mike?
The politics was one. When we first started out, and when they got until they got their skill sets, you're developing a good relationship with the coach. You're trying to develop a good relationship with the parents, and every team has this set of mama bears, that their kid is going to star or whatever. Developing a good enough relationship with them, and then when they got good enough, it became about politics and getting your kids exposure. Bryce went to Syracuse camps. He went to Penn State camps. And unless you knew the coaches and you were from the Northeast, good luck in getting really what I call truly recognized. So and most of the folks that were recognized in those regions did not look like me. Most of the coaches did not look like me. So me being someone who had to learn to at least speak somewhat basic lacrosse language, and then coming in where I'm the only parent, meshing with the parents who have connections with the coaches, who have connections with the schools. I mean, you have to understand it's a very intricate connection. So it's a challenge as a parent breaking into what I call that market, that environment. So it can come across as very intimidating and daunting if your parent, if you have kids who look like us and they're interested in lacrosse, you don't know what to do. So, and you come in a room and you're the only one there, and nobody wants to share anything because they know your kid's good or it's going to be good. So it's a lot of times about politics. I thought Bryce was could have been an All-American in Under Armour, but turns out that was all about politics versus more so skill. Yes, the kids were good, but it was more so about politics. The team was chosen based on who they know and where they came from, more so about politics. So that was one of the biggest changes in looking different and trying to navigate the politics of that sport.
Last question before we get to the comments. Obviously, professionally, Mike, and your job, you have one of those jobs that allows you to travel a little bit. You probably have a lot more freedom than some people who have to work a traditional 9 to 5 and may even have to work a second job to make ends meet. So as a professional, were there any challenges with you as far as your work scheduling, making sure you got all these time off? People look at you crazy. I'm going to my son's lacrosse tournament up in Baltimore this weekend or wherever. What kind of adversity did you face as the breadwinner?
Thankfully, I was blessed enough to have jobs that allowed me to travel, flexible. Not everybody has that. I mean, their schedule, Bryce's schedule, Justin's schedule. I mean, their schedule was more hectic than mine. And so, it was just a matter of how much money we were going to spend any given weekend. But not every parent who works a 9 to 5 has that autonomy. So it was easier for me, just the burden of the cost. But it's going to be challenging for a lot of parents. I don't, AAU is a little bit different. Baseball, was a lot more friendly. I had a 9 to 5 when they played baseball, and I still could, mesh it in. Their tournaments became our vacations. With lacrosse, completely different. You may have a tournament. Hey, we need Bryce to play in the state of Pennsylvania in a month, and I've got to change your schedule. Luckily, I was traveling at the time and could, finesse my schedule. But if you don't have that ability, it's more of a challenge.
All right. Now let's get to some of the comments from some of our viewers that I've highlighted throughout the day. First one comes from Edward Moore. Is lacrosse gear in stores like Academy or Dick's, or does it have to be ordered? Either one of you all can take that.
Go ahead, Bryce.
You're gonna find stuff at Academy. I would say Academy and Dick's. However, that's not going to be the most high end gear. I would say as you get better at the sport, I would recommend you want the better gear. This gear that they sell at Academy, that stuff's more like for beginners. It's not going to protect you as much when you're on the field. It's not going to last as long as some of the other gear you can order online. However, when you are in the South, most of the time you are going to have to order it online. That is just one of the bad parts. Whereas like with baseball, you can go get a bat, Academy, Dick's. I mean, even some of the other stores. Lacrosse, it's not like that. It's not the same at all.
And speaking of baseball, do you have to change out gear as you get older and your body feels out, kind of like you have to do in baseball? You know, baseball, you always have to get a different length, a different weight as you get older. Is it the same type of thing with lacrosse with your sticks?
Sticks stay the same. They stay the same. They're very adjustable. So one part of the stick is you have the stick, you have the mesh, and you have the strings that are attached to it. That's going to stay the same. You can change it out once it gets old, but overall the size, the weight is all pretty standard across the board. So you never have to really worry about, hey, I need to go get my stick's too light, or maybe the only thing I would say is maybe it's too heavy. However, it's not this. I wouldn't say it's the same thing as like a baseball bat or maybe even a glove. It's completely different things.
All right. Moving on down the line, Chuck Hunt made a comment. He says he thinks Jim Brown has a son that plays at Hampton.
Yep. He does. I actually I went to a camp with him. It was called Boost Camp. It was a camp set up for minority players in Maryland. I would say about 2-3 years ago, somewhere around there. It was a lot of college athletes that were playing at the time. That it was really nice, actually. It was a lot of players that looked like me. It was a really good experience. He does play there now, though. Really good, very good. One of the tallest kids I've actually ever seen play lacrosse.
All right. And once again from Chuck Hunt, this is the reason why we Black people have to be careful when viewing people such as Mike's son in lacrosse. We are not monolithic. Everyone is not interested in football and basketball.
Yeah,
so, that's more of a comment versus a question.
Yeah, I would say that's very true. So, I typically would get questions on them. So they play baseball or football, and they would default to those. And when Bryce would say, "Well, I play lacrosse," you get this. So very good point.
Yeah, it's always an interesting conversation. Whereas the first thing people assume, oh, what position you play in football? I'm like, I played in middle school, but I play lacrosse.
Yeah. All right. This was that comment you was talking about the DFW there, Mike. Brian Gautier says, I have two cousins out of DFW. They got full rides to schools in North Carolina and Maryland. So and that they went to private schools, I'm assuming in the DFW.
Yeah. I was gonna say if I had any, Bryce and I if I had to chart it again, the private schools in Dallas, Fort Worth, if there's any area that recruits their lacrosse kids better, it's the DFW area, especially the private schools. If you go to one of those private schools, they get a lot of exposure. And Bryce played with some of those kids. It was a travel again, but they do a great job at getting those kids exposure in DFW. It's a cost, as usual, as everything. But they're some of the best lacrosse athletes in the state of Texas. Bryce, you can attest to that as well. So,
Of course. I would say most players that get recruited out of Texas are coming from that area, whereas you see a lot of good players, even players who could play Division 1, 2, 3 in Houston, even Austin. A lot of them defer because they're not seen. They're not getting that same exposure the kids from Dallas are. A good way I could actually describe that, there were two showcases that came to Texas consistently. The one in Dallas had 99 plus Division 1, 2 and coaches every single year. The one that came to Houston had, I want to say, about 12 coaches. One of them, I would say, pretty mid-low tier Division one school, whereas the rest were just Division 2 and 3 schools that are at the same level. Just about. It's a really hard thing to get recruited in Texas. I could never stress that enough.
Yeah.
All right. Chuck Hunt reminded us of the Duke lacrosse scandal and the negative image which some of the stereotypes about the sport came about.
Yeah.
It is it's unfortunate, but I would say a lot of those stereotypes are pretty accurate. That's a lot of teams that I've gone up against personally at the collegiate level. That is a lot of what they kind of almost represent in a sense. That's kind of the vibes that you'll get when you go against them, when you're running past them on the sidelines, when you hear their parents screaming at you in the stands. It's not always the best look.
All right. Moving on. Mike, did you go to YouTube for videos on lacrosse strategy, terminology, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? You know, YouTube is the greatest teacher now.
I went to YouTube. I went to ESPN Sports. I mean, that's how he found it. I was everywhere, and I was still on the sidelines asking, okay, now what did they call? It took a while for me, and I credit, Bryce and Justin as someone I played baseball. So I knew baseball like the back of my hand, and lacrosse was a challenge. So yes, I was YouTubing, I was Googling, I was like, what is this called? And once you get a feel for the sport, it kind of comes secondhand. But I was lost. I was, of course, there were a couple of games I may have been sipping on some special potion because some of the crawls, but I was lost. I was like, what did he call? So I had to ask Bryce, what did he call on you? What was the yellow flag on the field? But yes, Edwin Moore, I was doing some serious YouTubing and whatever else I could find.
Oh my goodness. Let's see. Ties to clubs, most likely they have urban youth lacrosse programs. Are there a lot of those starting to come to your area where you get into the youth and the rec leagues or starting to see lacrosse? I know when I was in Alabama as a Parks and Recreation director, I know Auburn had tried to start a youth lacrosse program at that point in time, and they recruited kids out of the Tuskegee area. Asked me to bring a group of African American kids up to the camp that they were having. It was a free camp at that point in time. Don't know how that eventually turned out because none of the kids that I took up to that camp, unfortunately, none of them wanted to go back after that 2-day camp. So, I'm just saying, and it made, and I think it was more peer pressure than anything else. If he not coming back, I'm not coming back, coach. That's what I kind of started to get a lot of, despite the fact that I had the van to bring above transportation wasn't the issue. Like I said, it was a free camp. So, but what do you start to see as far as youth academies, not only in your area, but even where you play lacrosse at?
I would say in the urban setting, that's actually becoming more of a popular trend. In Denver, there's a program called City Lax. It connects back to all the inner city kids. The same thing is going on in the Bronx, New York. It's called Bronx Lacrosse. They do the same thing in Baltimore as well. In some of these major cities, they're starting to get these club programs to bring kids in the city just to the game, just to give them that exposure. In other areas, such as kind of like, smaller cities, the same thing's kind of happening. That growth just still isn't where it probably needs to be for there to be the more exposure that everyone wants to see in the sport. But that is coming. It's there. And I think people need to get the name out a little bit more for that, everyone to kind of recognize that.
All right. And now I'm contractually obligated to get this question up on the screen, you all, so bear with me. This comes from the dean himself. Talk about cities in the South like Atlanta, Charlotte, Dallas, Austin, etc. And this comes from the man whose name is on the show, Dr. Cavil.
Yeah.
So I'll start with Atlanta, actually. Atlanta, I would say, I think northern Atlanta has the best lacrosse in Georgia. They have schools like Lassiter, I'm gonna forget a lot of the names.
Probably like in Forsyth County, Cherokee
Right,
County,
around that area. I've
up in
got
that
blank on
area.
the names, but they send kids to some of the best Division II schools, some of the best Division I schools. One of the All-Americans in the national championship this past year, he was a starter. He was from Atlanta, Georgia. One of the players on the D2 national championship, they actually have a couple that are from that Atlanta area. And you see the same thing kind of in Florida as well. That Southeast area is starting to grow with lacrosse, but they've actually integrated it into their schools. So that's one of the big things. In Charlotte's seeing the same thing. There is actually a school in Charlotte who's a big pipeline into Division I schools in the Northeast. It's growing. It's growing specifically in that southeastern area. And where it starts is the schools that are putting lacrosse into their versions of UIL, where it's like, hey, we're going to fund this. We are going to get you buses, uniforms, equipment, whatever it needs to be. They'll get youth programs that get started in those areas, and they have the full parental support. They have the full city support to back them up with that. The same thing, to some degree, happens in Austin and Dallas. Dallas got so big because the private schools there, and such as Dallas Jesuit, Dallas Episcopal, and then even schools like Highland Park, where Jerry Jones' son went. Those are the schools where they're pouring so much money into lacrosse. All of those kids, they're signing up for it.
Yeah, we played a number of schools from North Atlanta. There was a very highly touted club school from Atlanta. You remember, Bryce? Oh my God, they were so good. The Greater Atlanta area. It was D something, and I'm sorry about that. But that North Atlanta area is rich with talent, lacrosse talent. So it's Marietta, Forsyth, that area. They have a lot of rich, and they're funding it, and the program support it. Whereas Dallas, whatever, there's a commitment with the private schools to support lacrosse, and a lot of African Americans are being marketed through those private schools in Dallas. So that I would say that's the biggest difference between the two regions. You have the regular schools in Atlanta, North Florida, and versus the private schools in Dallas. The one school in Austin, the school that Drew Brees is famous for attending, Westlake, they're not a private school, but they might as well be because the school is very rich. They have a very strong athletic program, and their lacrosse program is seen as one of the tops in the state periodically as well, just because of the funding there. So,
one thing I have not heard either one of you all talk about any programs out there on the left coast, California, Arizona, all up north in Oregon, Washington. You did mention Colorado. So how big is lacrosse out west?
Lacrosse is big out west in the California West Coast. That's where it is. LA and San Diego are the big hot spots. A lot of reason you don't see as many of those players going east to play Division I lacrosse is because that travel is a lot more expensive, going quite literally coast to coast to go get that exposure. So a lot of the players who are playing over there are deciding to play club lacrosse at any normal university, such as like University of Oregon State, schools like those, or going to Division II schools in Colorado, which there are about 4 or 5. So it's big. It's growing in Arizona. It's growing in Oregon. However, that exposure is a little bit even harder sometimes than it is down south. That is one of the many challenges that is coming to the sport. There have been multiple schools who have had to close down their lacrosse programs on the West Coast just due to the fact that travel budget is out through the roof. It's absolutely through the roof, and they can't fund anymore. So, and more schools would have to add it for the exposure to grow to the level it needs to be.
Yep.
We can't fund lacrosse, but we can fund softball in the Big Ten going all the way to the East Coast now, or the ACC going all the way to the East Coast. Let me get off my soapbox. Go ahead. I didn't mean to cut you off, Mike. I didn't mean to cut you off, Big Mike.
No. That was the point. I just saw Stanford playing Texas, so we could fund that, but you can't fund a lacrosse team. So. And I mentioned Colorado earlier, and I probably shouldn't get, as Bryce said, a lot of those players that you see in the Colorado area are coming from California, but that travel is not as expensive as coming all the way to the East Coast. So that's why, and you don't have as many D1 teams on the West Coast. You have Utah, maybe a few others.
Utah, Denver, Air Force.
That's
it.
That's it. So
I got you. All right. Hey, let's take our final break, y'all. There's one last question I have. There's one last comment. Then we're gonna let y'all wrap it up, man.
Okay.
All right.
Perfect. Let's go to break and we'll come back with the last question, and I'll hit Bryce with a few more questions of my own.
All right. We'll be right back on Dr. Cavil's Inside the HBCU Sports Lab.
Itchy, squirmy, scratchy, family not getting clean? Get Charmin Ultra Strong. Go get 'em. It just cleans better. With a diamond weave texture, your family can use less while still getting clean.
Goodbye, itchy squirm. Hello, clean bottom.
We all go. Why not enjoy the go with Charmin?
At Hampton Law, our primary goal is to provide non-traditional yet effective solutions and redefine the approach to client legal concerns. As your trusted legal advisor, we believe in sophisticated, personalized services that eliminate the confusion and complexity sometimes associated with legal matters. Our high standard for client care and concern, coupled with our extensive legal knowledge and skills, make Hampton Law a resource focused on the protection of the client's interest and overall goals. We value our clients and truly enjoy working with them. Visit thamptonlaw.com to conveniently schedule an appointment online. Tamika Hampton Esquire, 1631 Rock Springs Road, Suite 336, Apopka, Florida, 407-494-1471. thamptonlaw.com.
Nope. Nope.
Come on, him?
Ooh, I like him.
Quick, the quicker picker-upper. Bounty picks up messes quicker, and each sheet is 2 times more absorbent, so you can use less.
He's an 8.
He's a 9.
Bounty, the quicker picker-upper.
Compress the analytic data with your hip hop. If you know them like I know them, they gon' tell you if your team, if they wanna lose, and who the ball. So listen to Professor, yes sir, and pay attention, cause he gon' teach a lesson.
We're back on Dr. Cavil's. Oh, my bad. I forgot you the lead today, Mike. My bad. I'm so used to being the lead now.
That's all right.
Go ahead, take over.
I was going to say we're back, and you had a couple of questions or one question, so go ahead, and then I have a couple of questions I'd like to put on the table as well, but go ahead with your question.
And actually, Edwin kind of gets into what I was going to ask. So I'm hearing lacrosse is too expensive and too tough to recruit and add as a SWAC sport, right? But I wonder why more HBCUs, North Carolina and up to Delaware, don't have it, which was kind of the question that I was going to ask. What do we need to do to see lacrosse possibly added as a sport? Not only men's, but there is women's lacrosse out there, everybody, just so you know, as a possible HBCU sport. And I think maybe not in the SWAC initially, but I think the MEAC would be the target that I would go because of the travel, because there are a lot of other teams already in that area in the MEAC footprint for MEAC cross teams to potentially play. Either one of you all could take that.
Mm-hmm.
Dad, you want to start?
Yeah, I think you would have to look regionally, geographically first. I think Virginia State's going to be a success case. I think they're starting it right. I think they've started in a hotbed of lacrosse regionally. I think a North Carolina school would definitely have it. I think Howard's lacrosse team, Hampton, I think those schools will fare very well. I think the challenge you come is once you get below North Carolina, will those teams be able to sustain? Because if you look at the plethora of talent available in a Maryland, in a DC area, Pennsylvania, you look at that area, you look at all the schools, there's enough talent to go around. So there's enough talent to sufficiently put on a team. I don't know what the draw is in like South Carolina, enough of a draw because the athletes in Atlanta want to go to the Northeast. The ones in Florida, they want to go to the Northeast. So I don't know.
Well, maybe that's because they don't have any options, though.
Yeah, that's the problem. I think it's going to take one in the Southeast. There was talk at one of Morehouse. They have a club team. I would think if they could go at least D2, I think they would garner a lot of interest as well, considering they're in the city of Atlanta. You have a lot of talent in North Atlanta, as we both stated to. But if they were considered taking that team, D2, D3, D1 or whatever, I think they would have a lot of support. I don't think it's as much as finance as we think it is. I think it's about a support more so than anything else. Bryce, you want to jump in?
That was going to be my. Yeah, sorry.
I was gonna say I said BAC, but I also want you to consider CIAA as you answer this question, Bryce.
Yeah,
I was gonna say the same thing as my dad just said. I don't think it's so much as like a finance thing. However, I will say I think it's more of a success in the long run. I still think the types of players that they would like to draw to these schools, I don't think there are enough to make a successful team. I personally just don't believe that the players who play lacrosse, it's still a lot of times it's very black and white. You have a lot of, more Caucasian players who play the sport. That's the reality. You're going to see that on ESPN. You're going to see that in the pros. That's majority of the players who play this game. I don't think there are a high enough number of people in the black community who play this sport to the point where they could be successful at the next level based off of their exposure to the game. On top of that, I still just don't think you're going to be able to draw those extra numbers that you're going to need at specific schools such as HBCUs. I think that's where the biggest problem lies, not necessarily the actual funding of it.
Yeah, I agree. I think the players that you're going to draw, you need more of it. And then the Otis has a question. Hey, what's going on, Otis? Encounter bias. Oh, I was going to be one of my parting shots. Bias.
We can save it to the end.
I'll save that to the end. The bias that you have in this sport. But getting back, I think you could, but I think the exposure would have. It's kind of like the chicken and the egg. I think the exposure would have to increase in the Southeast before you have a team in maybe the SWAC, the SIAC or CIAA. But if there's any team that can do it, I would say in maybe the SIAC. I think Morehouse has a strong shot. They can do it. They have a strong club team. The exposure could be there if they put just a little bit of resources behind it. But I think exposure, more so than anything else, has to come before finance.
Morgan, Coppin, Maryland Eastern Shore, I think those need to be teams that really need to look at bringing it on also, because in Maryland, I mean, the championship is in Baltimore. It seemed like every year for a reason.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and they played the D1 championship in Philadelphia, which is about an hour and a half from Baltimore. So, I mean, the talent and the exposure is there. They played in a huge stadium. The stadium was 3/4 full, and you want that exposure to be in the Southeast. It's just not there yet.
I would have said Morgan State also. Oh, sorry for cutting you off.
Go ahead.
I would say Morgan State. Morgan State has the history behind them to bring a program like that back. All they would need is a good coach to bring in recruits, a good plan. I think they could honestly do a little bit better at streamlining the process of HBCUs getting further into lacrosse.
All right. So we were going to talk about, and to answer your question, but we talked about bias, and this is one thing I haven't. You've faced not only bias but racism on the field, Bryce. Can share maybe one example of one of your, some of your experience and what I told you to do about it?
So I would say one of the biggest things I could say is during high school, I saw this the most during high school. I was the target of probably every dirty hit that happened to my team. I think I had a total of somewhere around 3 concussions in high school from high hits, late hits, unnecessary hits, basically any hit that you can think of where I was on the ground, in the air, from something most of the time where I wasn't even in possession of the ball. For anyone who doesn't know, if you don't have possession of the ball, you are not allowed to touch that player. Most of the time I was a target of that. I could say the same thing about my brother. It was always one of those things where part of it might have been, hey, like, this is a good player. But most of the time I believe that wasn't really the case. I would say another part of that was probably the biggest thing I would say was during a showcase. One time I was doing really good on offense first 2 games. The coach of the team I was on, I got moved to defense, a position I do not play. Coach said, you're fat. The coach said, y'all are fast enough to play there. He meant you. He said that afterwards, but he said I'm fast enough to play defense. After that, he wanted, that wasn't really my position to play offense. Mind you, I'd already scored 3 goals during this game. And, I remember later on, my dad always told me, you should always just give people a reason to know that that's where you belong. Most of the time, you're a good chunk of the time, you can't change people. However, you can show them who you are. So that's always what I've done. I don't talk mess on the field. I don't say anything. I point at the scoreboard and I let my stats do the talking. That's what I've always done.
Yeah. So you kind of had to take the, for lack of a better word, the Jackie Robinson approach to a lot of the verbal and physical abuse that you received out there.
I would say so. I mean, I'd be lying if I told you I didn't let my head get the best of me maybe once or twice. However, I mean, at the end of the day, I would like to say I've rised above most of anything that's happened to me. I don't get up. I don't complain. I get back up and just say, hey, you know what? I'm just going to play. I'm just going to play. I'm going to beat you at it.
So let me ask you this. Did you get the proper call that you supposed to, as far as a penalty on the opposing player when these hits happen? And let me flip that. When you lost your cool because you're 20-some-odd-year-old or a teenager at that point in time, and we know y'all emotions get to you all that hell. I'm 50-some years old. My emotions get to me every now and then. Were the penalties on you seem like they were more severe than if another player had retaliated?
You see, that's tough. I would say I've maybe gotten 45, maybe even 40% of the calls that I think I should have gotten in terms of players hitting me when I shouldn't have been hit. I would say that number grew in college. I think the college game's a little bit different. They let the game play. That's on both sides. That hasn't really been a case. But I would say specifically while I was in high school playing down in Texas, I would say most of the time I did not get that call. If I did, it was kind of a pat on the shoulder, nothing crazy, like, okay, you can sit in the box, you can come back out like a minute later. Whereas a major penalty, which is what you should get in that case, if I get hit, non-releasable to an ejection. So I would say most of the time I did not get the call. I've never mouthed off to a ref. I will say that. First off, I most of the time just get up. I just get up, I keep my mouth shut, I don't say anything.
And likewise, his brother actually had more concussions and more targets. And he was the target. The higher you rise in talent and visibility, and you look like we do, you become a target. And if you ask the coach, they'll say, oh, that's just lacrosse. They're getting aggressive. If you look at the refs, there's an obvious bias in the calls that African Americans get versus the calls that others get. And if you switch that, you let a 6'2", 6'3" person of color hit someone, which we had one on our team. If they hit someone and that person moves, that was automatically a bad penalty. So there's a bias and how the penalties are called. I noticed it. It's as evident as night and day.
Right. So how many times, Mike, did you want to come out the stands and just show your color, as we would like to say, or B, there was that parent in the stands who decided that they wanted to have a verbal with you, and sometimes you could not walk. We can't walk away from them sometimes, because that when it's all said and done, that's my son out there on the field. Them my children out there on the field.
Oh, I did that. I did that 2 or 3 times. Well, first of all, I told him, I was like, if he hits you again, I want you to take a penalty. Take a penalty. If they want to throw a penalty, show them what a penalty looks like. He was nice when he said it. I was like, you take a penalty. As a matter of fact, I want a penalty from both of you, talking to him and Justin, a game. If they hit you, I want a penalty. I'm gonna applaud the yellow flag. Second of all, his brother, he's played in a couple of games where they were obvious hits, and they kept hitting the kid. So the parents were saying, yeah, that's the way they were egging this on. So I walked kindly down there where their parents were, and I said, I wish the parent of that kid would speak up, and they got quiet. So yes, as a parent, you do get parents get emotionally involved in this game, and I would be lying if I did not say that. There's a couple of times I probably should have dialed it down, but these are my kids, and you're not going to take these illegal hits without warrant and not have me say anything. It would be different if they were called, but no, the parent in you will kick in. It is a very emotional sport.
Right. Or if your child gets hurt on a clean play, it's part of the game.
Absolutely. There's no way some of the kids where, especially his brother that got, concussions, there's no way those plays should have passed and the ref would let him go. There was a statistic done on how many hits he had taken, his brother, and when he was a senior, it was an enormous amount of hits. And that could damage a child. He had to sit out a couple of games and these weren't clean lacrosse plays. These were dirty hits. Clean. And so none of the coaches would say anything or do anything about it. So I had to step up and say something. So, but I did tell him, I want you to take a penalty. And he was like, Dad, I'll show him on the field. No, I love Jackie Robinson, but take a penalty.
I need you to be Sugar Ray Robinson right now.
Exactly. I need you to be a different Robinson right now. So the other bias, and I think Bryce was alluded to, is that oftentimes, in baseball, how they'll take African-American players and put them in center field. Oh, you're fast. You can run and catch the ball. They don't put them in shortstop. They don't put them in second base. They don't treat them as if they have thinking. Yes, can't pitch, whatever. They do a lot of that same thing in lacrosse. If they're good, they'll put them in a certain position. You're fast. That's what they do, right? You can do this. But in positions that require thought, movement on top, and what we call chest on the run, there's a little bias. There's a lot of bias toward African Americans by coaches, and he experienced that on a club team. His final recruiting year, his coach put a couple of people at attack that had no speed, no thinking ability, no dodging, and yet they put him at midfield, which all he did was run up the field. That's great. That's a team effort, but and I asked him, and he's like, "Well, I have nowhere else to put these guys, and your kid's fast." So there's a lot of bias that you face, and it's a lot. Coaches will literally tell you, "Well, your kid's fast," so that's it. So I've had to deal with that. So, all right. So the last question, but you got my boy. You got me back going to that game when I wanted to jump on the field. I wanted to jump. So Bryce, as we kind of come to a close, some of the players, going into 2025, and I know that NIL and the transfer portal has impacted a lot of. But can you tell us a few of the players that, of color that you expect to see in the upcoming year that you expect to be good and on the forefront?
So I have actually 4. So there are 2 players from Notre Dame one player from a Division II school, actually. But I felt the need that that should be brought up because not a lot of people are going to talk about Division II lacrosse when I personally believe this is one of the best players in the country. So one of the first player, his name is Jordan Faison. He was a freshman from Florida this past year. He was the number 48 recruit in the 2023 class. And he also played football for Notre Dame. He was the Sun Bowl MVP whenever they played this past, I believe that was, last fall. He scored about 22 goals and 8 assists for a freshman playing on the national championship team. That's pretty ridiculous. For people who don't know lacrosse, if a freshman, for one, gets more than 10 points, he's one of the best players on his team. That's just hands down how it works. But for him to score then 30 and be one of the best players in the ACC, which I would argue is the SEC of lacrosse, that's an even better stat. He's also a starter on the Notre Dame football team, so he's going to come back strong for football and for lacrosse. Next, I would say Sean Light. Sean Light was on this very same team, another freshman out in New Jersey. Now, he was a number 26, I believe, number 26 recruit in all of the 2023 class for lacrosse. And he was a second-team All-American. Now, for a freshman to get on the All-American team in lacrosse, especially a player of color, that's pretty unheard of. You know, it's one of those stats where you have to appreciate it. You have to understand that they had no choice but to acknowledge that kid's skill. And he was one of the best players in the national championship game, going up against grad seniors, normal seniors, guys who have been won. There's the award in lacrosse called the Tewaaraton. That is the Heisman equivalent for lacrosse. He was D'ing up guys on the other team like it was nothing as a freshman. So only imagine what he's going to do in these next couple of years. So the Division II player I mentioned earlier, Kyle Lewis, he was a sophomore out in New York. He went to a school called Adelphi, who recently just won the Division II national championship for men's lacrosse. Third team USA All-American, first team All-Conference, almost led his conference in points as a midfielder, which is pretty insane. Attackmen in lacrosse score most of the points. For him to be one of the team leaders in points, and he's playing a position that doesn't typically score that much, that's a big stat. So those are the players I would say to watch. Last one I would say is there was a high talented freshman this past year, Julian Targete. He's at Ohio State. He didn't get that much playing time this year. I believe he was injured. I don't really remember what the case was, but I would say he went to the IMG Academy. He's someone to watch in the next couple of years as well. One of the fastest dodgers I've ever seen.
Thanks. Appreciate it. So that kind of brings us to the end. Bryce mentioned the Tewaaraton award. I always mix that word up, but what's the Heisman equivalent, and who was the first African American to win that Heisman equivalent in lacrosse?
So Kyle Harrison.
Yes,
he was the first Black player. He played for Johns Hopkins University. He was the first person of color really to win that award, and it was one of the biggest things in lacrosse. And I just want to say one of the craziest things that you will ever hear him say is that he was never referred to as a lacrosse player, just an athlete. And that actually happens a lot of times a day. A person of color playing lacrosse usually is not a lacrosse player. They are just a very good athlete. That's one of the things that the game still has to grow with.
Absolutely.
What's the name of that award again, Bryce?
The Tewaaraton.
Say that, Tewaaraton?
Yes, sir.
It's basically the Heisman.
And what year did that player win that award?
Was it 2005?
I believe it's 2005, I believe.
Yes, 2005.
Right.
First African American player to win it. So big deal, Kyle Harrison. So
has anyone won it since?
Person of color? No, Miles Jones was a player. I know he got very close, but points, politics, that'll do it at the end of the day.
No. Yeah. So well, all right. That kind of brings us to the end of the show. We went along a little bit longer. A lot of information. I want to thank everyone for their feedback. This has been very entertaining for me to have, this person who we found under a bridge with a box of Frenchies under his body, known as Bryce Washington. I want to thank AD Drew as well This is a show that touches a lot of diaspora, a lot of the HBCU diaspora. We've talked a lot about lacrosse and how it impacts the Black community. I think this is something that will grow in the African American community and eventually. But there's a lot of bias, a lot of politics that have to change about it. But to the athletes that play this sport, they're incredible lacrosse players. Like I always say, it is basically chess on the run. You're thinking 3 or 4 moves ahead of your opponent. And so, hats off to the Native Americans who created this sport and handed us to us. So it's been an honor for me. I want to thank Dr. Cavil, aka God, for allowing me to host today. I appreciate it. I didn't go.
Your name is on the show, Mike. You have the right to host anytime that you want to and kick any of us guest hosts off. Just always remember that. It's Dr. Cavil's Inside the HBCU Sports Lab with Mike Washington and Charles Bishop.
Yeah, but if Doc was on here, he tries to silence my mic and everything, so it don't feel like my show. So I want to thank Bryce, who's up in his internship in Maryland, starting this week. Thank you for jumping in. I think I only gave you a day or two notice, so thank you for jumping in. And AD Drew, thanks as always for being that behind the voice, that producer, that engineer extraordinaire as well. So to the fans out there, I get a lot of emails. Try Blackster's Blackster's blog. Blackster's blog. You see a lot of talent in the African American community and lacrosse. You see folks committing from high school to college. You see lacrosse players at HBCUs or just Black players at PWIs. So so try that on Instagram as well. So with that, I am today's host, and with no further ado, I will leave you with the final words of a famous person who I of peace, love, and hair grease. So
that's not how we end that on this show, man.
I was wondering if you're gonna say that. So
you want me to do the outro for you, man?
Yeah, no, do the outro because I wanted to change that outro now that I'm the host. But go ahead and do the outro. I'll let you do that.
All right. Thank you for listening to Inside the HBCU Sports Lab. Let me start that over. Thank you for listening to Dr. Cavil's Inside the HBCU Sports Lab. Make sure you share our podcast with your friends and colleagues. Mike Washington, Bryce Washington, AD Drew, and of course, this show is created by the Dean of HBCU Sports, coming from inside the lab in the College of HBCU Sports.
Yeah, Bryce.
Again,
if they want to, Bryce, real quick, if they want to find you, where can they find you on either Instagram or?
I would say Instagram's the best place. Bryce Wash 26. Maybe you put that somewhere on, the Facebook, give me a shout out but yeah, I can be reached there. Any questions that anyone may have, I'm open at all times.
All right.
Yeah. And I want to thank you too for letting me be a part of this. I just got to get this in. This kind of reminds me of a similar situation when I was coaching, and I was coaching basketball. My son was playing, and my dad was my assistant coach. So this kind of reminds me of that same feeling that I get. And I just wanted to thank you too for allowing me to share in this with you. So, Mike,
all right.
We not doing the normal outro?
No, we'll do it. So again, thank you for listening. Okay, we'll do the normal outro. I know Dr. Cavil's listening, but we'll do the normal outro. So again,
I ain't trying to get fired, man.
We thank you for listening to Dr. Cavill's Inside the HBCU Sports Lab with Mike Washington, Charles Bishop, and today's guest, Bryce Washington. The show airs Tuesday and Thursday, 6 p.m. Central Standard Time, Sunday, 9 a.m. Central. We look forward to next week as we discuss the latest news in the lab. So follow our leader, Dr. Cavil, on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Inside the HBCU, Inside the Sports Lab on YouTube. Dream big. Continue to move forward. We will talk to you soon. Course.
Lecture. Say dismissed, Bryce. Say dismissed.
Dismissed.
There you go.
There
And we
you
out.
go. You're supposed to school him on that before we get on the show.
I know. I forgot to school him on that when I was going to see if he caught it all, but
2 days. 2 days notice. 2 days notice.
That's all right. That tells us that you don't watch your dad on the podcast. We out, y'all.
We out.